available directly from the council website from the link which was sent out to members. Please note that the agenda and reports have been published in two parts, the main agenda pack and supplement 1. So the agenda pack contains items 5, 7 and 9, and supplement 1 contains agenda items 6 and 8. When you are asked to speak, could you please state clearly who you are so that anybody online can identify who is speaking? And ensure, please, that you use the microphones if you are in the room. The meeting is going to be audio recorded. As agendas are now viewed electronically, please, members and officers, refer to page numbers from the published agenda pack to assist everyone present in finding the appropriate information. We're not expecting a fire alarm, but should this happen, please follow the Democratic Services officers and they will lead the way out. Mr. Jackson, are there any apologies or substitutes?
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, committee. We have received apologies from Councillor Trimnell, for whom Councillor Osborne is substituting. We've received apologies from Councillor Cottle. We've also received notification that Councillor Ham is hoping to join us online, having been slightly delayed this morning.
George Johnson's supposed to be placing Nick Cottle, but he's online. I don't know why.
The Johnson, who's online.
Right, thank you very much. Anything else of which we need to be aware, ladies and gentlemen? No. Are there any declarations of interest, please? Nope. Right, the minutes of the previous meeting have been circulated. May I take them as a true record, please? Thank you. Seconded? Yes, thank you. So proposed Councillor Sieb, seconded Councillor Lovell. Yeah. May I see all those in favour, please, of accepting those minutes? Any against? Any abstentions? Okay. I'll sign those in a moment. Agenda item 4 is public question time, but rather unusually, we have no questions from members of the public today. So we'll move straight on to agenda item 5, which is the General Fund Revenue and Capital Budget Monitoring Report, month 11, end of February 2025. This is beginning on page 19 of the agenda pack, and I'm going to invite Councillor Lation to introduce the item and then invite Nicola Hicks to present the report. Councillor Lation.
Try this one.
I don't know. Ah, it sounds more like it.
Right, here we are, Chair. Sorry about that. I think this is our first meeting, Chair, with Nicola Hicks here, acting 151 officer. So really glad to see Nicola in the room. Welcome and thank you. I just wanted to say that this is again an improved position. Although we're presenting it as if it were a provisional outturn, it's not yet the outturn. So further work is still ongoing. One thing I did just want to highlight before I hand over to Nicola is that the Appendix J2 now shows the movement in savings from month 10 to 11 as requested by Councillor Rodriguez. And so I think that's an improvement that hopefully we'll be able to continue to do that from month to month. But very happy now to hand over to Nicola. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lation. Good afternoon, members. So section on the front page, page 19, section 3 and 4 of the report shows a positive forecast now at 31.014. As members know, previously when we've reported, this means that the draw on reserves is now reduced down to 5.762 million as forecast. So significant movement there on what was set in the budget. So that's a really positive movement in terms of protecting the council's reserves there. If we just move down into the report, section 5 just shows a summary there of the movement that's happened from month 10 to month 11. Actually, it's not really the big ones weren't so much in the adults and children's, which is what we normally see. The movement has been in the community services and climate and place, where there's been some movement there in regards to vacancies that have created an underspend and also some income. The services have received there, as well as kind of a lesser waste overspend there. So that's a really positive movement in terms of that. We will be looking further in when we look at the outturn position as to why those came in at last minute and they weren't forecast in month 10. So that's some of the analysis that we will do at the end of the financial year. Just in the other big movement there is in relation to non-service. So we've spoken before about how our investment income and our borrowing debt figure is built into here, and that's what affects that forecast outturn position. And we previously spoke about how our asset sales and the amount of capital receipt we have in will impact on that figure, and that is significantly what's happened, that we had some big sales receipts in at the end of March, which has meant that the team have been able to forecast the fact that that was received, and that debt, the amount of level of debt that we thought we would need at the end of the month due to not having the council tax in, was actually positively affected by the asset sales receipts we've got in. One thing I challenged the team around is, shouldn't we be forecasting those receipts to have come in? They're very nervous about that, because actually until an exchange happens, and we all know what sale receipts can be like, sometimes they don't actually come to fruition on the date they had. And I think they'd rather estimate the fact that we'd have to borrow rather than the fact that we then are in a position where we haven't forecast that and we didn't get the sale receipt in either. So, but that's something we'll work with the team on if we continue with our asset sales. Just in terms of page 20, just skipping down to page 23, you'll see table 1 in there is the usual table that shows the services in terms of the projections and the over and under spends. You'll see actually predominantly it's nice to see a table where actually there's fundamentally it's green. So that's a really good position to be in for the council. We still have those red services in there, but we're working really hard to work with the services around how they're going to mitigate and still continue to work with them into this financial year on those. But a positive position to be in. If we go down, just section 11 just gives a bit more detail on why there is that movement in forecast overall underspends, and as you know, each of the appendices also contain that, so if you wanted to read further into that. But if we just focus on section 12, which is on page 25 of the report, in relation to DSG, there you'll see there's a decrease in the forecast there of 1.993 million. So still means that the deficit year-end position being 62 million, which is not a great figure, and we know the importance there of the statutory override, but at least it's a slight decrease there, and there's some work being done in that area. In terms of the mitigations there, obviously as this is a month 11 kind of a provisional outturn position, those mitigations have helped that position, I think, there. And I think as we go into 25, 26, we will see how some of those mitigations need to stay in place. And the work will continue in those areas, because we're still in a position where we haven't been able to set a balanced budget with no external support in doing that. So I think it's fundamental that we don't take the foot off the pedal, as they say. Just going down into the MTFP savings on page 27. You'll see there the table now. We've not got the on track or at risk. We've actually just got the savings there. They were achieved or they were unachieved in the year. good progress in terms of it being 89%, but obviously not ideal that it wasn't 100%. We needed it to be 100%. That 11% there will be rolled forward into the next financial year for those services to achieve those. Now, some of the services have in-year mitigations. So I think they were hopeful they might not need to roll them forward into next year, but actually that's a one-off mitigation. It's not a permanent mitigation. So unless they can permanently mitigate it, that saving still remains there. And as you'll see next year's report, budget monitoring come forward, when you get month 2 report, you'll see that table slightly changed now. And we're going to have a new purple column in there, which I shall explain when I bring the report forward. Just in terms of the collection rate, we spoke before, this is on page 28 in paragraphs 20 and 21. We spoke before about how some of that collection rate was impacted by the implementation of the income management system that remained for month 11. The team is still saying to me they're not believing there's any other reason why that collection rate was slightly down. But that's something that I am closely keeping an eye on and working with the team on. But obviously that team, as they undergo now the amalgamation of the system work, they're under extreme pressure in that team at the minute. So I am keeping an eye on them just in terms of what we're doing in that area. If we move on to capital, which is on page 29 of the report, you'll just see that we're now forecast to be 148.606 million against a budget of 149.259. So not a massive swing there, but obviously as we bring out-term report to you, then you'll see the final figure there. I think there was just some underspend there in terms of a school that managed to actually be delivered under budget, which is unusual and good news. Just in terms of section 28, there's just 2 additions to the capital programme there for month 11, and they can be approved by the executive because they're externally funded, so there's no additional borrowing requirement on the council for that to have to go to council. But that's all I was going to say, but happy to take any questions on the report or the appendices.
Thank you very much, Nicola. Are there any questions or points? Councillor Seeb.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't know if you want to take it now. My question's on the appendices and the savings in particular. I note that a lot of the savings, a large proportion of the unachieved savings are in climate and place. And I went through the supplementary reports to actually have a look and see what sort of items there were. And I'm a little surprised they weren't made, because they were things such as parking charges changes and so on.
I'll have to ask the question in relation to the specific one on parking. I know there's one in there in relation to waste, which we all know about, but I don't know in terms of parking. And it might be that it wasn't a permanent, it can't be seen as a permanent savings. They might not have put it through, but I will check that one. I don't know the answer off the top of my head, Anna. Sorry.
Yes, just generally, I think the one that the ones which.
Okay, so Officer Hicks has taken a note of that, and she'll come back to you on the specific of the parking. Right, other members, please. Councillor Lovell.
Thank you, Chair. Just looking at page 45, which is the children's appendix. Obviously know about the external placements and the SEND situation. I'm just looking at the other pink items and notice that there isn't anything spelled out in the report about those particular items. So just wondering if there's any comment. I mean, educational psychology, ESP management. I mean, I've looked all these up. Can't see them in the report. So just wondering, I mean, should we be concerned about being areas of overspend that we need to be aware of and keep control of? So thank you.
Thank you, sorry.
Councillor Shearer.
No, sorry about that. So I heard, I didn't hear, was it ESP, did you say was the other one? And EP?
Apologies.
No.
My apologies, Chair.
No, no, it's okay.
Yeah, there are about 3 items in that list.
Yeah.
Curriculum and literacy, EPS management, inclusion strategic management, and educational psychology. Yes, there's 4 of them.
Yes.
So, I mean,
Yes.
small in each case, but worthy of asking the question. Thank you.
No, they are, and I'm sure that Nicola would have more information about this than I would. But certainly, some of those are where we've either had to put extra support in because we haven't got them actually in place. Some of them might be some interims that I think might be in there, but I'd have to look to Nicola for the detail on those ones. They are quite small, and they're offset by some of the other larger savings. But although we still have an overspend of about 4 million across the entire service, about 2.9%. So it is quite detailed. I'd have to get exactly the detail for you on those smaller things, though, unless Nicola's got it to hand. I thought it might have been interims, but I could be wrong with that.
Yeah, no, I think it'd be safer if we get you an answer and come back. That's okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, now Councillor Osborne.
Thank you, Chairman. It's just a question, really. I'm looking at table 5, and I think it's page 31 on ModGov, and it's the bottom item about capitalised transformation costs. And you've put in there capital receipts of 40 million, which I'm assuming at the moment, is that coming from our asset sales? And also, and it comes up in the transformation report, is that we still have in principle agreement with MHCLG, and that's covering the 2 years 24, 25 and 25, 26. When are we actually going to get confirmation of those capital directives? Then we have certainty going forward.
Okay. So in terms of the roll forward for the we've got approval that we can roll forward the figure that we put in for 24, 25 in terms of capital transformation capitalisation that we hadn't spent. We've got approval that we can roll that forward. So they've already agreed that as part of our in principle letter for 25, 26. What they haven't done is actually said for the year just ended 24, 25, they haven't said here's how much money you're actually having and here's the transfer, because they're waiting on us to deliver them a set of accounts that they can have a look at, and that Grant Thornton can then provide some assurance that we do need that amount of money that has been allocated in principle. So we're not going to get that until we deliver them a set of accounts, and the team are working on the end of May, if not the first week of June, to get those accounts done. And then Grant Thornton will come in. They're due to come in to us to start the audit in July. So it's not going to be before that date.
So in terms of timeline, we're talking into the autumn by the time Grant Thornton have completed their audit and then have reported back to MHCLG?
MHCLG might not require the whole audit to be completed, but they might want some certainty around the funding side of it. And so therefore, as soon as they've started the audit, we can have that dialogue with MHCLG. But we're trying to maintain regular discussion with MHCLG so that they know the account's coming and we can get that certainty as soon as we can.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Vice Chairman, Councillor Hoppers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Firstly, I think this has been a much better managed year than last year, and the accounts are looking considerably better. And I just want to point out a mathematical problem on page 33. The risk register, 4 times 5 equals 20, not 25.
Well spotted. We put that in there so that someone could spot it. It should be 5 times 5.
Good. Thank you, Councillor Filmer.
Thank you. It was just a couple of things. I very much welcome the introduction that Ms. Hicks made in terms of the forecasting, because one of the concerns I must admit I had from reading this report was we're very close to the end of the year and yet we've still got big changes happening. So for us to make plans as to what we need to do in terms of savings,
that can only be based on the data we've got. So I'm glad to hear you're looking into sort of what's happening on the forecasting front in terms of making that more accurate. In terms of the I think it's page 27, you mentioned obviously we didn't quite achieve the 100% of the savings. Obviously partly that was because we'd rolled forward failed savings from the previous year, and we're rolling forward some from this year. How much more confidence do you have that the savings we're rolling forward this year are achievable, and that we're not sort of constantly rolling that sort of £4 or £5 million worth of unachieved savings each year?
Yeah, so I think table 2 is correct on page 27, shows the rolled forward savings in the first column of 5.255, but you'll see that the actual unachieved for adults was nothing, and the unachieved for non-service was nothing. So actually it's just the children's element that has been at risk of delivery there. And I believe that saving is linked to the homes in Horizon and the delay there. So therefore, once that comes on board, we should be able to achieve that saving.
Okay. Does any other member wish to comment? Any further comment from officers? Well, at the moment, ladies and gentlemen, I don't think that we've addressed any serious concerns or suggested changes to the recommendations that are being made to the executive. So that being so, I will ask us to note the recommendations and endorse them from this committee. So I will propose that. Is that seconded, please? Thank you, Councillor Filmer. May I see all those in favour of that? Right, thank you very much. We move on then, if we may, to agenda item 6, which is the medium-term financial strategy. And this is what you will find at the beginning of supplement, the supplement beginning at page 3. And I will ask Councillor Lation to introduce this item once again. Councillor Lation.
Thank you, Chair. As you know, Maria Christofi left us as interim 151 last Friday, and she has left us, I think, in a very clear position about where we are now. I think we're on a more robust base for building on the future. She's overseen a huge amount of work, as well as in finance, on things like procurement, contract management, and working with Sarah Scrutiny as well on risk. And we will continue to see more papers coming through executive and to full council, all the counter fraud papers as well. So there's been a huge amount of work done. I'd just like to point out on point 20, which is page 7, there's an error there to save your vice chair finding this error. March 25 on that graphic should of course be March 26, because that's the next budget setting. And there's also the update 12.5, it talks about the budget being set in March, and it's talking about it in the future tense, and it needs to move to the past tense before it goes through this committee and then to executive. But I'm very happy to hand over to Nicola Hicks, and members of the committee will note that where things are greyed out, that's where there have been changes made since the last time we saw the MTFS. So happy to hand over. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Lation. So 2 of the team, Emily Hollicott and Palm Phipps, they're on the call, so I'm sure they're smiling at those 2 anomalies that have been picked up in the report. So I'm sure they'll note them to get those changed. So this is an update report. Members saw the figures when we put the budget through in February 25, or actually March 2025, strictly. I think when I spoke to Maria about how to present this report today, she talked about it in a very positive light in terms of it's a positive report to show the steps that we're already taking to look at the budget being set for 26-27. And I know members before have said about we want to see more detail, we want to see much faster pace of changes and to get us on a more stable financial stability. And I think some of this report should be recognised as that in terms of we're bringing this report forward in May. You know, last year in the budget setting cycle, we were much further behind. We're much further ahead. And as Councillor Lation spoke, Maria made sure before she left that we were set up on the path to start the budget cycle and how we were going to approach it. So I think that's kind of how I've also viewed the report and how I'm very pleased with how she's left us. I'm very grateful. Just in terms of the report, paragraphs 7 and 8 in the paper, which is on page 4 of the supplement document there, talks about the status still being critical. And I think that's really important to note that we are still in that critical state in terms of our financial sustainability. And that's because we weren't able to set this year's budget alone. We had to have the EFS application. And so kind of that is a temporary solution. The money came in for this year to help us balance, but goes again and therefore gets added to that gap again next year. So it wasn't a permanent solution. And also I think critical in terms of we've received an audit report from Grant Thornton, as you're all aware, that's got the 2 statutory recommendations in. And I think that's really important as well to note that that's why that critical status is there in terms of being able to set a balanced budget by ourselves and having clean audit. Is really important, and part of this is around that is fundamental in regards to the transformation plan to help close the gap that we are seeing that we've currently got for next year being around the 101 million mark. If you just move down through the paper, section 18, which is on page 7 of the report, talks about the timeline. The MTFS for us in the finance team is a very much live document. The team work on it every day, every week. But it's a moving picture in terms of things that they know about happening in the budget. They amend in terms of forecast positions. Certainly on the savings side, if they get something or different scenarios, changes to budgets that happen throughout the year. So I think it's very much a live document, but that's why we're already able to bring that update to yourselves. And we've committed in this report to bring a further MTFS update to you in July. And in there, we would like to show some of the savings that have already been developed. So I think that's where the timeline kicks in terms of trying to help that gap, is to already try and bring forward some of those things in July, which you'll remember from last year you saw much later in the year, whereas we'd like to start bringing those much earlier this year. In section 20, that shows that timeline, and cancellation's already picked up about the date needing to amend there. Table 1, which is in point 21 at the top of page 28. What we'd like to see there in terms of 26-27 is actually the savings figure increasing and the growth decreasing. That would be the ideal optimum there. So we need to see that movement there in order to close that gap. The next section of the report talks about what's the implications of our failure to achieve the budget. So we don't want to think about that at this stage, because obviously in that mix of that means 114 territory. But I think it also talks in there about we would like to set this next year's budget without the EFS. But actually that is the fallback position if we're unable to do that, that we might need to ask for a little bit of support again for next year's budget. But we don't want to start the year off on that. We want to try and achieve as much as we can through the budget savings and through the transformation programme. And I think it's important that if we do go for EFS, we need to demonstrate our ability that we have tried everything we can to try to set that budget by ourselves, because obviously MHCLG will be looking at that. Just in section 25, talks about the importance of the transformation programme, and finance are working really closely with the team to make sure that we are putting our resources towards that as well in order to help deliver that at pace where possible. So that's really good. Just in terms of section 30 talks about the different work streams. So it talks about the budget work stream savings there and talks about the transformation. And you'll see there, we've kind of done it on a 30% budget saving and 70% transformation there. We don't really want to be a council that has to find 100% of our budget gap through budget savings, because that could mean potentially cuts to services. So the transformation element of that is really fundamental in order to help deliver some of that gap. And that's what was recognised by government when they allowed us to use flexible use of capital receipts, so our asset sales, to help fund our transformation programme, and our capitalisation directive was also around ensuring that we've got some money to be able to deliver some of those projects to help us in the future. I spoke already about it bringing it back in July, and we'll also bring it back through the executive process. In terms of that resource allocation there, we were already tracking any spend, what we spend in relation to transformation. So you'll see there's already some resources that have been allocated where we've allowed some additional expenditure in the capacity to help deliver some of the transformation. And that's what the finance team will be tracking, and the benefit that's been realised through that spend. And then just section 20, risk section on section 35 on page 12 of the report. You would have seen some of these risks before. It's vital that we monitor those really closely, and that's where some of the amendments will be live in terms of the gap and the changes we make to the MTFS. That's all I had to say on the report, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. So I will begin with Councillor Lovell. Well, you caught my eye first.
Caught my eye first, fine. Page 13, Chair. I'm looking at homelessness, the paragraph. I'm just bearing in mind that actually this subject was the front page headline of one of the national newspapers today, and didn't recall any comment on it in the period 11 report. But obviously, this is something we, in line with other councils, we're going to have to think about. Are we presented here with a major problem that we are going to have to seriously budget for, the accommodation of those who are homeless? Thank you.
As a chair, I'll speak, and I think calculation wanted to come in. So what I would say is, nationally, we're not experiencing the same level of demand and issue with homelessness as what some of the other councils are. The London Borough councils are being significant. Can you hear me now? So I think it's the London boroughs that are nationally, they are being significantly affected by the figures, and that's where some of the press headlines are coming. That said, we have seen an increase in our homelessness spend and the amount of people in temporary accommodation, but that hasn't been at the detriment, touch wood, at the minute in terms of the budget side. But it's something certainly we are keeping an eye on and looking at the pressure that we may have in the current financial year 25-26.
Councillor Lation.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say, when we've been talking about the revised strategic risks, this is one of the things we've talked about, along with pressure, demand and demographics for social care. So it's very much on the radar. But as Nicola has said, not as much of a pressure in Somerset as in metropolitan boroughs, and also in some of the councils that are kind of on the south coast. They do have massive pressure, some of them.
Thank you. I'm just going to ask Officer Jones to come in at this point, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just to come back and as well to provide additional reassurance to Councillor Lovell's question. In essence, we would anticipate, as part of the transformation programme, to be able to break that down into some meaningful chunks. If there is a pressure emerging in our housing service, we would anticipate seeing measures that would be taken as part of that transformation programme that would address some of that spend. So part of the conversation that's going on at the moment, and Nicola referred to it in terms of the debate and support that's going into the transformation team, is understanding with each and every service what are the key pressures that are emerging in their areas, Some of those are documented in the budget. In fact, most of them are documented in the budget, and what activity is underway to try and arrest, control or reduce that spend whilst either maintaining or enhancing that service. So that's probably one of the themes that will emerge if we're seeing that as a common theme with the national picture in Somerset. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Sieb.
Thank you, Chairman. Financial planning risks on page 12. I was a bit surprised. All of the listed risks centre around the level of expenditure and the end cost. I had sort of expected after last year when we got the local government settlement on December the 18th, and with all of the traumas around signing off various previous financial accounts and so on, we ended up with an awful lot of last-minute pressures on the officer body to react to late-breaking news, having been marking time for a long thing. And I just wonder if there shouldn't be a risk around time in the financial planning. I've no doubt that you will contingency plan for a very late local government settlement. But I do think it does affect the strategy really ought to be able to keep the plan as good as possible. And if that means that we're coping with a later date, then, we shouldn't see that as a surprise. I just think, and the other thing, of course, with timing, which is something which I discussed with your predecessor, which was sometimes it can be extremely useful in the MTFP to differentiate at the quarter or month on budget profiling, because you may well find that towards the end of the year in achieving a budget, year-end spend is absolutely critical, and you may be pushing things a quarter in order to balance books. It just struck me that time wasn't part of the risk planning, and I just think it probably ought to be.
I'll note that.
Because it takes resource.
I'll note that for our next report as to whether we include something. It's always a welcomed Christmas present for the finance team to receive the settlement so late Christmas week.
Okay. Councillor Filmer.
Thank you. Questions if I can. The first one was just on in the Appendix A, Table 1 on page 29, you referred to the savings target range. Just wanted to understand the table a bit better in the sense of we've got a lower end range, we've got an upper end range, but when we then look at the agreed new savings, there's only one of those that fall within the range that we set. So I just wanted to understand what the range means and why most of the actual savings are outside the ranges that we appear to have set.
I think my answer with that would be that similar to last year, we had a lower end and an upper range. And what we don't like to do is give people a too low target or an unrealistic target. And as the work starts towards those achievement of those savings, that number flexes in terms of they try to come in the middle, but we push them to come in at the higher end. And that's just where those come. They're just kind of effectively targets.
It was just a slight concern. You're saying we're pushing people, but in most of the cases, they haven't even reached the lower end of the range. The service levels, that falls well within the range, but everything else is outside it. And I just wonder whether we need to review where those ranges are. The second question I was just going to ask was, there's later on in the report, we talk about benchmarking. This is on page 45, where we're looking at our fees and charges. And I just wanted to make sure when we're doing benchmarking, it says we're benchmarking with local authorities and checking regionally and nationally. Do we also bear in mind at that stage benchmarking incomes that people have as well as our fees? Because obviously, historically, the Southwest has tended to have lower incomes on average than some of our more wealthy areas in the Southeast. And I would just be a little bit worried if we benchmarked our fees against areas that are have a lot more disposable income than we do necessarily in this patch.
We try to have a look at our fees in relation to our neighbouring authorities. And I know there's a lot more work planned for fees and charges, because something we didn't quite do last year for every fee and charge was look at full cost recovery as well. And actually with the council's size of the budget changing, we need to ensure that that's covered and picked up as well.
It's trivial. I might actually be wrong because I'm not sure, but I read the report. This is page, where are we? It's 59. Talking about the conclusions and way forward. It says the seriousness of the council's financial position cannot be underestimated. I wasn't sure whether that cannot be over. I mean, we need to. It can't be overestimated how much trouble we've got, rather than understated. Would be fine. Yeah, but we just need to check on the wording of that one.
That's a good point. I'll pick that up.
Yes, quite right. Yes. Councillor Osborne.
Talked about or is planning for thanks. The government has aspirations or has discussed the concept of a 3-year settlement. Do you know when that is likely to come in and what impact that will have on our financial planning, positively and negatively?
No. So I was at a conference last week where it spoke about the desire is to have a 3-year settlement, but at the moment they haven't said that. There's a lot of work being undertaken with the fair funding review that's happening at the moment, and we're going to get more information about that in the autumn. But I think there was we had a central government analyst speak to us, and it's very interesting her take on what's happening with the budgets and with the Chancellor's decisions and what could come out of the autumn statement and in terms of that position statement. But I don't know when the 3-year settlement was come, but that's what every council has requested to provide some certainty.
Yeah, I certainly think it would, as you say, it would provide that certainty and would probably make in some ways for more accurate budget and forecasting. In terms of the fair funding review and what the analyst was saying to you, were there any indications of what is likely to happen or the position going to be for authorities in the southwest and this one in particular?
No, we pushed her, but she didn't like to comment.
I'm glad to hear it. Keep up the good work.
Right. Are there any other members who wish to speak to this, please? Councillor Lation.
Thank you, Chair. If I could just say, and Scott Waldridge may be able to say this far better than I can, one of the things that is in progress at the moment is the calendar for the next year. And so we have looked at budget setting February, March 26 and dates. So being cautious, and where in the year just gone, the budget setting just gone, we were very much aware that it was really difficult for members and officers to have continually changing dates. So we've gone for a more cautious approach for 26, which gives us a budget setting date. I think it's the 4th of March. And then we have to have a reserve date before the 11th of March, which is when we have to have our council tax set. And then the possibility of a full council before that in February to do exactly the same as we did this February, where we pick up all of the papers that are not budget setting. So instead of having one massive meeting, that we split that into 2 parts. And if anybody knew what the government might come up with for councils, we'd love to know, wouldn't we? The only good news we have, Chair, is that we haven't got to go through LGR again, and some councils are going through looking at fair funding review, what happens to council tax, business rates reset and LGR, and some of them regional devolution at the same time. So my advice to everyone is stay in Somerset. Don't move to Devon and don't go to Dorset because you can't afford the council tax there. Stay in Somerset. Thank you.
Thank you. So Councillor Rodriguez, who is present in the room, Diego, you've asked to speak. So Councillor Rodriguez.
Thanks, Chair. Sorry. Just a couple of questions to help me understand, really. When I'm looking at the forecast budget gap savings targets for 26-27, you've obviously already mentioned the split 70-30 between transformation programme and business as usual budget work streams. My question really is around the transformation programme, where we're looking at a £70 million gap and target savings there. And then when I look at the particular work streams in the table available in Appendix A as well, I note that the business as usual budget work streams, they're a lot more detailed than what the transformation one currently shows, I feel, in the information there. And so my question is, at what point will we see more perhaps detailed information around the transformation, because that's a really big £70 million gap and target savings, and also how does this particular committee, at what opportunity will be able to measure each action point within that, and also the timeline for delivery, and also obviously thinking about the risks involved within being able to achieve some of the actions within the current work stream as well.
Thank you, Chair. Probably best dealt with by me in terms of the issues given the scope to the transformation programme. I think first and foremost, inevitably looking at individual budget savings, there would be more detail set out at those particular points, because the transformation programme, whilst there are a number of activities underway, they need to be reviewed and confirmed that they're appropriate, that they will deliver exactly what they said they would deliver, and are they fit for purpose in terms of the scope of change that's required. So I think that's the first point. We would anticipate seeing more detail, certainly in the budget savings at this stage. That said, we do need to move at pace in order to develop and confirm the scope of the transformation plan in its totality. We're required, and we will need to, and have scheduled to bring that to executive in July for approval. Clearly, this committee will have a role not only in discussing, reviewing and recommending to executive any views or thoughts on the scope of that plan in advance of it being considered, but equally have a hopefully that works. So as a result of that, it gives us an opportunity then to define the scope, ensure that Scrutiny had the opportunity not only to review the scope, but also to track the delivery of that, so that not only can you see the totality of the budget savings that are coming through, but also the scope and scale of the transformation plan, and is it delivering what it said it would at the time scale that's required in order to fulfil the gap. I would point out to members, and following the question, that of course a delivery programme of £100 million is a significant challenge, and there is a line clearly set out within this budget report, and it was set out within the budget reports to this date where this has been discussed, that there is a likelihood of requiring exceptional financial support again. The scope and scale of that is to be determined once we understand what those issues are going to be, but equally it also is dependent upon the pressures in the budget and whether they are whether they come to fruition as currently thought, whether there are steps or measures that are being taken by services or the authority more generally to reduce those pressures in their totality. So the transformation plan is not only about new activity, but also about reviewing the current activity and ensuring that those activities are fit for purpose, and that the pressures that are identified in the current budget, we do everything we can to reduce those, because that has a material impact upon the overall budget gap. So July being the key date, Scrutiny have a key function in reviewing all of those steps as we go through. And in addition to that, Scrutiny will also have a key role, and I'm sure that Executive will be considering any of the feedback from Scrutiny in monitoring the delivery of the plan moving forward. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Rodriguez.
Yeah, just a final observation, comment on that. Thank you very much. Appreciate the comments about the need to move at pace, but also just conscious that the Executive in July, that'd be a quarter of the way into the financial year. So just the need to move at pace is clearly of the essence.
Absolutely. I think that's absolutely the killer point in terms of ensuring that we continue. So part of this is understanding what work is already underway, what elements of transformation are underway, because it's not a new concept across a number of our services, in fact the majority of our services. So ensuring that we understand what is in those plans. Are they going to deliver in time? Can we do anything to assist them and deliver at a quicker pace? And as you'll know from the budget conversations, funding was set aside for exactly that purpose, to be able to deliver it. So it's not a case of publish it in July and then start delivery. There are a number of activities, as Nicola's already stated, that are underway and already in delivery, but clearly we need to bring that into a coherent plan so that we can then begin to work out, will it deliver everything we need it to, but also are we prioritising the right activities in the right places? Thanks,
Right, ladies and gentlemen, I don't see anybody else in the room wanting to speak or anybody online indicating that they wish to either. So we will move then to the recommendations. There've been a number of comments and suggestions from members this afternoon, particularly concerning timing and time as a risk. And I know that the officers have taken careful note of what we have said. There isn't, however, I think anything that will change what we're seeing is going to be recommended to the executive. So again, I will move from the chair that we have considered and commented, and we are content that the recommendation should go forward to the executive as printed. Thank you. May I see all those in favour? Thank you. Now, ladies and gentlemen, my very helpful chair's schedule says that we're now due for a comfort break because we shouldn't have reached this point until 3:15. But as we're making such good progress, I'm going to suggest we carry on, if that's okay. So we'll move straight to agenda item 7, which begins on page 129 of the agenda pack. And this is the Improvement and Transformation Programme Quarter 4 Progress Update, which is going to be introduced by Councillor Butt-Phillip.
Thank you very much, Chair. Members of the committee will be well used to seeing this report or similar reports, as these do come regularly to this committee. It's a particularly notable report on this occasion. It covers the last quarter, which includes the completion of the workforce programme. There are some really important figures in that to note. We are on track to make the £34 million of savings budgeted for, but it's also, I think, the most notable figure is that there are 121 staff on notice of redundancy, and whilst we are always deeply saddened to see any of our fantastic staff leaving, it is notable that of the 121 staff on notice of redundancy, 40 are voluntary redundancies and 81 are compulsory. It has always been the objective to minimise the number of compulsory redundancies, and in the scale of the workforce changes that have happened, the fact that the team have managed to get that figure as low as it is relative to the 555 total reduction is a huge achievement. So I think we should all be very grateful to the team for having achieved that. It is a genuinely really fantastic achievement. As has already been covered very recently in this meeting, the report also looks towards the future, in that it does talk about the need to bring forward the full transformation business case, which we will be doing and should be coming to the executive in July. Those, I think, are the very quick highlights, but I'll hand over to Sarah Scrutiny, who will, I'm sure, say more.
Thank you, and thank you, Chair. Yeah, so just to say that as Councillor Butt-Phillip has said, this is your regular quarterly report. It does cover the progress of the last quarter up until the end of March, and there is more detail in there about that delivery in quarter 4. What you also have in here is the final section of this report is focused on the programme risks. There has been a review. Obviously, a number of those risks were related to the workforce restructure. So some of those have either been moved across into managed as business as usual or been closed down as a result of us coming to the end of that part of the programme. So recommendation here to note the progress that has been made across each of the elements of the transformation programme and also the assessment of the programme risks. And yep, as has already been said, to note that the work at the moment is very much focused on the planning, working alongside colleague Nicola Hicks and colleagues within finance on the transformation plan for the next few years.
Okay, thank you very much. Members. Councillor Osborne.
Good, it's working. Thank you, Chairman. It was just a question. It's probably a clarification, please. On page 131 on MudsGov, the paragraph workforce programme, and halfway, about third paragraph in, second paragraph in, a bit lower down, you are describing the recruitment and selection phase, which began in February. You state that there was 317 roles with job descriptions, and you received 554 expressions of interest. But interestingly, there were 108 roles that received no expression of interest, and you re-advertise those. So need clarification, were those sort of advertised because no one within the organisation wanted to do them, or is this sort of linked to the ring fence, and that once people have been given priority within the ring fence, they then go more widely internally? Could you just clarify how that works, please?
I'm going to hand over to my colleagues in HR, Nicola, to respond to that one. Thank you. Through you, Chair.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So, and what you've said is quite correct, actually, because the process for the selection process did happen over a period of time, people did find themselves in different positions. So you're right, they may have been waiting for a ring-fenced appointment to take place before they then knew their own position. And obviously, if they hadn't been appointed to that, then that's when they'd be looking to express interest in other posts across the organisation. So it was and that's why we made sure that jobs remained open on the SharePoint site that hadn't been filled earlier, so that there was every opportunity for suitable alternative employment to be considered.
Okay, thanks. And within that process, were there any posts that still remain unfilled and will actually have to go outside the organisation externally?
Yes, absolutely. So we're already advertising posts externally, but they're also still available so that people can see that through our own SharePoint site where jobs are being advertised. So there are a mix of some of our hard to fill roles, which we would be advertising externally anyway, but any that we fail to fill internally, we are putting out for external recruitment as well.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Southern.
Thank you, Chair. Some figures were mentioned earlier, percentages or numbers of voluntary accepted on the last 120 redundancies, I think. Very simple question. Could you tell me, out of the total redundancies we've had so far, how many have been released under voluntary redundancy?
I'll pick this one up, Chair. Dawn Bettridge, Interim Director of Workforce. In terms of the total number of voluntary redundancies, the workforce programme's been over 3 stages. So you'll remember early part of last year, we had a voluntary redundancy scheme. We had 194 staff leave on that scheme. We then had the corporate leadership team restructure, and we had, I think we had 2 members of the corporate leadership team leave under a voluntary arrangement. And then in the total council restructure from top to bottom, we've had I think it's 40.
Yeah, sorry.
I'm just going to check. It's around 40 voluntary redundancies and 81 compulsory. So that gives you an idea of the numbers altogether. But in total, we've removed 551 full-time equivalent from the pay bill in 12 months. And the last part of the programme has resulted in 81 compulsory redundancies, which, as you can tell, we've managed to mitigate those redundancies considerably by the use of sort of vacancy management, redeploying staff around the organisation, internal adverts, and managing vacancies and managing our agency workers as well. So that's where we've had the flexibility to really minimise the number of people that have unfortunately had to lose their employment with Somerset Council. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Seeb.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I just say thank you for writing a clear and comprehensible risk report. The trouble with that, though, is that there's always a risk that somebody may understand the risk report. And in this particular case, I note there are a fair number of ones which were 25 or 16 up at the top end of the matrix, where we are saying that as at now, work has ever so slightly shifted the probability of an outcome, but we have not yet done any work on the impact of an outcome. In other words, the dot's gone from the top right-hand corner down one square when it actually needs to go down 2 squares and across 2 squares. I'm just wondering if, based on that, the progress bar charts under those relevant things are reasonable, because it seems to me you have to have a rather more comprehensive answer to get the impact of an outcome affected. That be fair?
Yeah, so through you, Chair, thank you, and thank you for the comments around the risk report. It's something that we're doing lots of work on as a council. So the mitigating actions should attempt to address both the likelihood and impact. It is often the case that the likelihood is something that is easier to address than impact. So what you're likely to see, sorry, I use the word likely again, what you're likely to see is that drop down first, and then what you can do is then reassess those mitigating actions again. Is there anything that we can do to lessen the impact of this risk occurring? So these are live risks that we review regularly. Obviously, they're coming as a quarterly report to you, but they are reviewed more regularly than that, monthly, as part of the programme. What I will do, because actually what you can't see here, is to look at the movement of risk over time. That's something I'm really interested in. So we will have a look at that, and hopefully when we come next time, you'll be able to see some of that movement.
Chair, if I could follow up. I think we're in very much in heated agreement about what's involved. It was the progress bar charts at the bottom of the specific reports. Some of them, to my eye, appear to be claiming quite a high progress when this set of circumstances is there. And as you say, the hard yards are the ones in impact.
Thank you. My apologies for not picking up on that particular one. What we'll do is we'll go back and we will have a look at those. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else on the council table? Councillor Osborne, you want to come back?
Yes, please, I do. Just a couple of points relating to devolution, partnerships, localities and devolution. You've now set up a BC FSE officers working group. Could you confirm, please, that will indeed contain officers from the voluntary sector, and it's not just going to be Somerset Council officers only? That's my first question. My second one is on to devolution. When are we going to start helping the smaller town and parishes to devolve? I'm thinking here of Ilminster Town Council, who's, despite assurance to the contrary, whose toilets shut on the 1st of April, despite the fact we were negotiating a devo, the asset transfer. We actually had surveyors booked, and they actually had to drop the keys in. We've agreed it through full Ilminster Town Council, full council meeting. As far as I'm aware, Julie told me that the paperwork had been signed and sent back. My concern is that the smaller ones are getting put back. And although it might seem a very trivial thing, for Ilminster, it does matter, and it matters very much, because we also have to find costs for electrics, which were overdue for inspection, and other maintenance. And as time goes on, we may find we don't get quite such good quotes.
Through you, Chair, if I may, just ask Alan Jones to respond to that one.
Officer Jones.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies. So just representing the service here in terms of their response. So first and foremost, the VCSFE group primarily was established initially to look at the engagement with the VCSFE across the council, so council officers. However, that's being broadened as the Partnerships and Locality Service have a dedicated role that engages with the VCSFE, and particularly because we have that memorandum of understanding with the VCSFE, really starting to bring that to life. So yes, they do participate in that group. Really, the next step is making sure that we are coordinating our engagement with the VCSFE moving forward, because there are lots of different avenues into the various organisations across the county. That's the first point. The second point in relation to whilst I can't comment on the individual circumstance, I know that the programme of activity that was set up last year and into this new financial year is being reviewed, because inevitably there was a particular focus on those areas with, if you like, larger town areas because of the breadth and scope of the change they wanted to bring forward. However, I think it's been acknowledged within that programme of work, it needs to broaden and ensure that it encapsulates all of those requests. It simply is just a case of making sure it can all be resourced and dealt with at the same time. What I would say is I'll take that away. I'm sure we've taken a note. I'll take that away in particular regarding your query about Ilminster.
Yeah, that would be really helpful. Thank you, because then we can crack on and do the work, because I did have an assurance, and I've got the email to prove it, that I was told initially that the Ilminster toilets would continue to remain open because we were in negotiation. I suspect that what the service director forgot was that the contracts ended on that day, which is a possibility. I'm being nice to him, but nevertheless, I was told one thing to find something else happened.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Osborne. Councillor Butt-Philip.
Yeah, I just wanted to make the point. Thank you very much, Chair. I just wanted to make the point that I think whilst Councillor Osborne's points are very well made, there are two slightly separate points there. I'm acutely aware of the need for us to expand devolution to smaller settlements. That's really important, and it has been prioritised over the past year or so for financial reasons. However, one of the guiding principles is also to try and preserve service delivery and the maintenance of the keeping the public toilets open is incredibly important. If that has not happened, it is not because we haven't prioritised the place because of the size of the town. It is for some other reason, which I'm sure we can explore.
Okay, I'll feed that response back. Thank you.
Councillor Hobhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm on page 8 of the appendices. Sorry, 7 of the appendices. And the unmotivated workforce risk assessment doesn't seem to have much mitigation to get it down. I'm willing to, it's signed off by you, Alan. And it worries me because it still ends up very high.
Thank you, Chair. That is an excellent challenge in terms of the scope of interventions that are going on in particular. So as part of the overall approach, and you've seen this within our previous reports around the need for a people strategy, but within that, some practical applications of what does that mean to work here, making sure that there is effectively a contract between the leadership team, the management team and staff, so that they understand what can be reasonably expected of them, but also what will they get as part of that contracting process. I think contracting is a bit formal and a bit out of date, but I'm sure that conveys the essence of what I'm trying to say. In truth, it's about making sure that we recognise and reflect that we need to rebuild a number of those teams following that restructuring effort, and particularly following the corporate peer challenge review that said that we need to do some of that work because of the the damage that's been done as a result of such a fast-paced restructuring. So I think that's an excellent point. I think probably one of the recommendations that could come from you today to review that risk and consider whether the actions are sufficient. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anybody else in the room that wishes to speak? Councillor Rodriguez.
Hello.
I'll try.
Sorry. Thank you, Chair. For me, it's just really in the way in which the risk register is presented. And through you, Chair, I know you mentioned about tracking the movement of at risk in future reports, which was one of the things I was going to mention. I did pull up the risk register that was presented at the last quarter, the one finishing mid-December, and it took me to compare. I only just compared the first three risks, ITP 1, 2, and 3, to notice that there has been a positive movement on the current scores, which is great. However, the register as it is shows the direction of travel with just a line, which I'm assuming there's no direction of travel is what it means. And I would suggest that the officers are probably not giving themselves enough credit there, where there has been improvement, and we as or this committee is not aware. So there's perhaps an inaccuracy in the three that I have seen, and I don't know if there are inaccuracies in the rest of the risks that are presented in the risk register. And yeah, just to reiterate the need to get the movement at risk shown on there to save us from going from one quarter to another on different meeting agendas.
So thank you for that. And yes, that does look like the direction of travel. We need to have a look into that. What I would just draw members' attention to is that on page 135 of the covering report, there, what we've tried to do is pull out of there some of the changes. So for example, ITP 1, 3, 13 and 14, there have been those reductions within likelihood there. So what we'll do is just make sure that that is corresponding with that in the appendices as well. So thank you for raising that one.
Okay, thank you very much. And finally online we have Councillor Johnson, Dawn Johnson.
Hi, many thanks. Thank you for these reports. I just wanted to check, and it may not be within this remit of what we're talking about, but if I could just check, where are the harmonisation of staff contracts sitting at the moment? Are they under the transformation process? Do they sit outside of that? Or just where are they operating, and what's the progress on harmonising all the staff contracts so that they all align, rather than being some people operating under different terms and conditions?
Thank you, Dawn. Officer Jones.
Chair, thank you. And I'll also call on colleagues. I'm just giving some advance notice here. They're trying to not see my eyes at the moment. So just in terms of the process, there is no specific plan associated with harmonisation of staff terms and conditions, because there are costs and issues associated with that we need to take into account. Clearly, as we restructure or as staff were either move or take on new roles, then they would move to Somerset Council terms and conditions. In some areas, there will be a specific need to intervene, potentially for operational reasons, and clearly there could be a cost associated with that, but no specific plan associated with it. However, you are considering today, the pay and reward programme, which looks at addressing those particular concerns around where there are areas of concern and whether we need to intervene or do something about that. So until that programme is completed, there's no specific intervention being set out. At that point, I'll introduce Dawn Bettridge, who I'm sure will do a far better attempt at answering that question.
Thank you, Alan, and thank you, Chair. Yes, it's a question we do get asked a lot, and it isn't as simple as being able just to simply harmonise contracts, which I know members will be, and Dawn will be very well versed on as well. When we became a unitary and the 5 organisations came into one, our colleagues in the district councils, which are all on different terms and conditions, are TUPE protected. So therefore, we cannot by law just harmonise contracts without going through a formal process process, and there are high risks associated with doing that. And we took the decision when we became a unitary to focus on the council restructure and reorganisation to ensure that we had the right structures, the right size of organisation, and we could then look at how many staff remained on GP protected terms and conditions before we started any consultation with our trade union colleagues. Again, because of the financial emergency, that really did drive our, the necessity to look at the structure first, to ensure that we could balance the budget for 25-26, and then we'd move to the next phase of transformation, which, to be honest, would always have been required as a result of local government reorganisation, and that's to look at the impact of having 5 organisations coming in together. And we all know that we have big, sort of negative morale issues caused by workers that are doing the same work but on different rates of pay and on different benefits and terms and conditions. The reason that that continues is because of the TUPE protection by law. And in order for us to change that, there are various routes that we could follow, but central government is also really clamping down on organisations considering more draconian measures, such as dismissal and re-engagement onto new contracts. So we have not gone down that route, but what we are intending to do, and we'll cover this in the next item, as Alan said, is look at our pay and reward arrangements to make sure that they're modernised and fit for purpose for Somerset Council going forward, so we can recruit and retain the very best people for Somerset Council. We will naturally be able to move people on to new terms and conditions, as Alan said, when people change jobs in the council or when we have new staff to us as well. And we will enter into a period of consultation with our recognised trade unions around a potential new contract of employment for staff. And that will be a very complex and elongated piece of work that will take up to 2 years, because it's really important we get this right, and we do this legitimately, and we make sure that any contract that we're offering to staff in the future is absolutely fit for purpose, and as I said, can continue to attract and retain our very best people in our workforce. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dawn.
Thank you.
Now, Councillor Soughton and Councillor Osborne wish to come back.
Yeah,
so Councillor Soughton, you were the first.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Actually, I'll leave that to the next section, because my question will cross over with the next item. Thank you.
Councillor Osborne.
Thank you, Chairman. It's on the improvement and transformation risk register, and it's the first risk, insufficient budget for redundancies. And you're referring to that we are still relying on a in principle capitalisation direction for that. Your latest note, 10th of March 2025, below the tables, is you are recommending closure of this risk in the next reporting period, in brackets April. Is it really wise to close this risk, bearing in mind we have yet to receive that capitalisation directive and have it confirmed? It still sits there.
Councillor Lation, would you like to respond to that?
Yes, there are lots of moving parts in this situation. I've spent lunchtime talking to my colleague Sarah Wakefield about all the moving parts and why things are not absolutely crystal clear at this stage. So we don't, for instance, know the cost of the redundancies yet. So we have an allocation in the year gone, and we have an allocation in this year because the 40 million was split across the 2 years. We also have a flexible use of capital receipts policy that went through full council. We have all the options available to us with government, with letters from ministers. How it plays out and how much of each is needed, as we've already seen in the previous year, we're drawing down far less of the earmarked reserves than we had anticipated when we set the budget. So then how much of capitalisation directive we use, and then we're looking forward to the year we're in now. Of course, you know, we've now got double the contingency, and we've also got a risk provision. So I think what I'm trying to tell you is that our officers have done a really good job of leaving options open, that government have worked with us and we had to submit to them for exceptional financial support a considerable amount of documentation, and that had options in it too. And we are making sure that we're being cautious in our dates for full council next year, and the scrutiny dates will work from that too. So I think what we're trying to do is make it as possible as we can for this council to leave exceptional financial support behind us, but allowing for the need for it, as long as the trajectory is right and that the amount we need is reducing considerably each year, so that government can have confidence that we're moving in the right direction. But I do find it challenging to explain to colleagues at the moment, Chair. What I just would like to say that I think our officers have done a really excellent job in making it as possible as it can be that we do move away from being what's now called an EFS, Exceptional Financial Support Council, because that is the movement that government requires from us, that we move away from that, that we do not become, no council becomes dependent and used to using capital receipts, because as we all know, they're finite. They can only be, those assets can only be sold and used once. But I hope that helps. Chair, if I may just take one moment, it would be remiss of me not to say that at the next executive meeting on the 12th of May, and then at audit on the 22nd of May, there will be a revision to the matrix, the risk matrix. So where we've got 5x2 and 2x5 showing as green, they will move to yellow, because at the minute we're showing a matrix that shows 10 differently than 9. So that on the list of how many are amber and how many are green, one of the green ones would then move to amber under the new risk matrix. But that needs to be agreed by executive and then endorsed by audit. So that work is underway, and it will, every time you see the mini matrix, it will look very slightly different, but in the right way, in an appropriate way. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much,
Okay,
Councillor.
thank you. And I don't think the fact that our officers have worked very hard and in very challenging circumstances, I don't think that's in any dispute whatsoever. They've done a sterling job, and it's not easy having to sort of liaise with MHCLG and change of government, change of officers, all the rest of it. Very difficult. I was just sort of feeling that perhaps, or maybe I've read it wrong, that we perhaps need to keep this one there so we still have a view of it until that capitalisation is in the bag. And then I think we'll all heave a big sigh of relief.
Right, thank you, Councillor Osborne. I don't see any other members wishing to speak, so members have raised a number of concerns and suggestions, particularly regarding risks and notably in respect of devolution. Otherwise, the recommendations, I think, stand. We note the progress made in Q4 and note the current assessment of programme risks as detailed in Appendix A. I will move that from the chair. Is that seconded, please? By Councillor Southern. May I see all those in favour? And any against? Thank you. So I'm now going to suggest that we pause until 3:30, so you can have a quick comfort break, and we will kick off again at 3:30 prompt with agenda item 8. Thank you very much. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the meeting. We will reconvene and move to agenda item 8, which is the pay and reward programme. You will find this on page 61 of the supplement, and I will invite Councillor Theo Butt-Philip to introduce this item, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm very much enjoying this meeting. I'm particularly enjoying how at every agenda item, members are so keen to get on to the next one that they start discussing the subject matter of the next one. So this is the this is the decision report on the commencement of the pay and reward programme, including the review of the pay and grading structure. This is something that was always going to be essential as a result of bringing 5 organisations into one. It will, I believe, help us to address some of the significant issues which have been raised here and elsewhere over recent months around staff morale, staff rewards, staff retention, and staff recruitment. I'm not going to say too much here. I'm going to hand over to the professionals. I'm going to hand over to Dawn Betteridge and Nicola Hoyak, if I've pronounced that correctly this time, to take us through some slides.
Thank you.
So there is an executive report going to the next executive on the 12th of May, which outlines detail of the programme, and with that we also have an outline business case. Now it is an outline business case because we're in very early days within this project, and one of the main purposes in going to executive is to get agreement for the funding for us to be able to start this project sort of in detail and move it forward. So the business case will develop over time, and particularly we'll talk in a moment about sort of the need to work with an external expert sort of partner on this, and we will work with them to be able to develop sort of the approach in more detail and the plan around that. So really sort of obviously the main reason for coming to Scrutiny today is to share with you that executive report and to seek any sort of feedback and comments before we have the executive meeting. So a little bit on the context around sort of pay and grading. So there is work that's already happening around the people strategy. There's a new strategy being developed for Somerset Council. As part of that, we'll be looking at the sort of broader aspects of pay and reward, so the employee value proposition and looking at both tangible and non-tangible reward. But you'll see from the papers that we've developed at this point that we're giving that a targeted and immediate focus around pay and grading, which are really the issues that did come up at the end of the last discussion, so that we can sort of focus in on and address some of the key issues that we've got specifically around the pay and grading aspects of things. So just to talk a little bit about sort of the current state, which I know that you will be very familiar with most of this, and again we touched on some of these issues at the end of the last item, but the pay structure for Somerset Council was created in 2004. There were some updates in 2014, but quite simply it's sort of out of date. It's not sort of fit for purpose within the organisation. There's sort of a whole range of things that need to be addressed as part of the pay structure, and that's before you even look at sort of the market value within the pay structure. It's just the way that it is set up. We have the 5 councils that came together, but we've actually got sort of other sets of terms and conditions. We also have we have a number of people on sort of NHS agenda for change terms and conditions, and so there are a number of different terms and conditions within the organisation. And those do sort of have TUPE protection, which means that, but it does mean that we've got people sort of undertaking similar roles on different pay and different terms and conditions. With the TUPE protection, that means that we can't change them there have to be some specific legal reasons for us to be able to sort of change those terms and conditions. And even then, we'd have to make sure that we were doing that through a collective agreement, so through negotiation with the trade unions. We can't just implement those changes. So, we would have to do that anyway for contractual changes, irrespective of TUPE being in place, but that does give lots of added protection. We also know that pay isn't market right across the board. Now we know that because people tell us when they're leaving the organisation. It's one of the key, one of the top reasons people tell us that. Also, some initial work that Corn Ferry did for us when we were starting the restructuring process also had a quick look at that diagonal slice across the organisation, and that's reinforced that our pay is not market right. But I don't think that's news, is it, to most people in the room? There's some lack of trust around job evaluation methodology and process. Some of that is perception, some of it may be reality, but irrespective of that, people sort of are not fully trusting the whole process that we undertake to evaluate jobs within the organisation. And there's that lack of understanding between job evaluation and the pay structure. So job evaluation doesn't determine sort of pay, it's the pay structure that determines the pay, and then it's obviously job evaluation is there to size the job. So we do need to make sure that there's better understanding around sort of how job evaluation and the pay structure sort of do correlate with each other. And as we said earlier, there are, all this is impacting on staff morale and trust around how the organisation pays and rewards its employees. But it is a complex piece of work because of all the legal issues involved and all the sort of complexity around that. And so we do estimate that it's going to take a minimum of 18 to 24 months to implement this project. But we will obviously look to see if there are aspects that we can sort of implement as we go along, so it's not all waiting till the end of that process. So a little bit around what the project aims to deliver. So in terms of scope, we're looking at all jobs across the council. We won't look at those on teaching terms and conditions. Those are nationally agreed terms and conditions. We also will need to give some consideration around support staff in school, because at the moment they are on Green Book terms and conditions, but I know that the current government has given some commitment to also looking at sort of national pay for school support staff. So we'll have to keep an eye on that as part of this project. And we'll also sort of make some decisions as we go through the project around the senior leadership posts. Salisbury, there's about 40-50 staff that we have who are on Salisbury terms and conditions. That's sort of educational psychologists and the like. And as we mentioned earlier, we've also got a number of staff who are on Agenda for Change terms and conditions. So we'll be looking at providing new evaluated job descriptions for all jobs across the council. We did a number of those as part of the restructuring, but we certainly haven't done them for the whole organisation, and we need to look at them in the sort of context of the new structure. We'll make sure that we have an updated, streamlined, sustainable approach for making sure that all jobs are properly evaluated, that it is legally compliant, and that it does foster that fair and equitable working environment. But it's also important it keeps the organisation safe, because our job evaluation scheme does need to make sure that it is sort of mitigating against any equal pay risk. But we are going to have to make sure, we've talked about market rates, but we've got to be realistic. We've got to make sure that whatever is being proposed is affordable for the organisation. And we'll be starting on a sort of cost neutral basis. That's unlikely to deliver what the organisation will need, but it will give us a benchmark so that when we do some other modelling around potential costs, we can have a look at what that will give us. We've talked about the need for a collective agreement. Obviously, this is what we aim to deliver, but we've already had some initial discussions with the trade unions. I think it's fair to say they sort of recognise and welcome the need for there to be a pay and grading review. So we'll continue to work very closely with them, both on an informal basis, but also as part of that formal consultation and negotiation as we work through the project. And we will also have a look at what opportunity that will give us to widen out beyond pay, so that we're not just looking at pay, we can look at where there are those other differences around terms and conditions, and where we might want to be looking to modernise those, sort of irrespective of the LGR and the differentials that we have within the organisation. What we'd hope to see as a result of the project is we do reduce that reliance on market supplements. That's recruitment and retention allowances that we have in place. And that we're sort of more attractive through the pay and reward side of things, that we can also reduce some of that reliance on interims, consultants and the like. So the final thing that the pay and grading structure will enable us to do then is it will sort of give us, it'll help us build on the principles that were agreed around the organisational design work that's been done. Because it does give more transparency and it helps sort of make sense of all those different roles right across the organisation. So it'll help build and reinforce around that work. I mentioned earlier that we'll need to commission and work with a third party to support us on this work. So there's some good capability within the organisation around pay and reward, but this is really a very specialist piece of work, and and it's also about sort of capacity within the organisation. And we know that other councils and organisations that sort of undertake this piece of work, that they very much do work with an external partner to give them that advice and support through the process. So it'll help us go faster. It will sort of make sure that we can sort of implement things more quickly. It will ensure that we've got real tight control around the job evaluation outcomes, and it just sort of reduces that risk for the organisation. So we have done some initial work on resource, looking at the scoping of resource that we needed. But again, what we will do is we would aim to work with that external partner so that once we're clear about the activities and the work and the timeline that we're working to, but we've also sort of spoken to other councils around the resources that they've had to sort of put in place internally as well as externally to support this work. So we are building a clearer picture around what it is we're going to need moving forward. And just a bit on sort of risks and issues. So, you know, you will appreciate the sort of risks there are as an organisation around sort of paying equal pay for work of equal value. TUPE does offer us protection around that in terms of the current position, but that sort of protection does get undermined over time. So it's really important that the organisation starts to look and address it before sort of the risk starts to heighten around equal pay for work of equal value. We'll need to have a look at the affordability, obviously, as we go through the project, as we've already discussed. And if we do look at school support staff, that could potentially then also have an impact on maintained schools budget. So we'll make sure that they are being included and consulted and engaged throughout this process. We've talked about the capacity and capability in-house. You know, there's a lot of work going on just in terms of service improvement as well as the transformation work. So we'll have to make sure that we have got sort of some finances there to be able to backfill as necessary if we need to get people working part or whole time on the project. There's obviously some risk about procuring the right external partner. We have done some initial market engagement on this though, and we do know that there are potentially 4 organisations who are sort of wanting to work with us on this. So we've just sort of gone out there, and so at least we know there are some organisations there who are available and willing and wanting to work with us. And then obviously we are looking at sort of the mitigations for staff turnover over the next 18 months or so. So if one of the outcomes of this is for us to reduce our reliance on market supplements, what is it that we can do in the interim? And so we have sort of, you know, we are very much enabling those recruitment and retention allowances to be paid, but obviously making sure that they do meet, we can evidence the need for those, because that's really important to manage that equal pay risk. And then we're obviously sort of mindful as well, and I think in terms of sort of elections sort of coming up in the future as well, and what impact that might have around decisions that members need to make around this. So in terms of costs, so based on the initial external benchmarking we've done, we're estimating the cost to be in the region of £3 million. So it is a significant investment for the organisation, but very much looking to sort of address some really key and critical issues. The executive decision is sort of for the allocation, and we're looking, it may well be a mix of flexible use of capital receipts sort of and/or capitalisation direction. So we're working with finance very closely on sort of where the funding for this project will come from. And that £3 million is separate to any potential increase that there would be in pay bill costs as well. So we are mindful of that. And although there is some growth provision that's been made, but obviously the work and the modelling that we do will help inform around any potential costs that we have there. And the final cost we'll be able to review sort of again as we're going through the procurement process. That will give us a much clearer idea. So we wouldn't be looking to exceed that 3 million. It could come in less than that, and obviously we'd be very mindful around sort of the need for value for money throughout this process. Just a couple more slides. So in terms of the timeline, we've just broken it up into sort of a number of phases. We're very much in that phase 1, which is making sure that we can get the funding agreed for this, getting ready to go out for the procurement process so that we can actually start the formal part of that process as soon as possible after executive, on the assumption that that decision will be made. We've obviously done some very early comms, particularly with leaders across the organisation, because these papers are being made public, and we wanted to make sure staff were aware that we started to give the focus around the pay and grading. And then once we've gone through that procurement process, we expect to be able to sort of start with an external partner from September, and then we can get into sort of real detailed planning around the whole project from that point forward, with a view to sort of having things implemented by April 2027. A bit about the process. There's another tick now that or 2 ticks that I think we can add to this now. So, we met with informal exec last week. We've obviously got today's meeting before we go to executive on the 12th, and then the parallel work we're doing with that is around the procurement and putting more detail on the business and project plan. And then the final 2 slides I had were just outlining the recommendations that are within the executive paper that we're asking you as scrutiny to consider.
Okay. Thank you very much. Any other comments from Councillor Butt-Philip or other officers? If not, we'll move to members. Councillor Soughton.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. A number of things I'd like to sort of go over, if I may. Terms and conditions is always a very emotive thing, isn't it, when you work in a business? And I think it's absolutely important that that's got right for morale, for cohesion of the business and everything else. And then we are a very large organisation. I think that does need to be harmonised as soon as it possibly can. Cheapy side of things, we've had 5 organisations come together, and some individuals might have come across on Cheapy on more favourable terms than somebody else, etc., etc. Now, my understanding of Cheapy was that we could always change that as long as the contract offered is as good as, if not more favourable than the one that they are already on. So changing the contract over, in my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, that's not that difficult as long as the terms are as good as, or if not more favourable. But that would have to be harmonised across the whole organisation, which is this project is looking to do. How many unions do you have within the organisation? Are you represented by more than one, or okay? So, which is the most dominant union, or isn't there a dominant union in Somerset Council?
Yeah, we work with a number of recognised trade unions, and as I said, we're looking at the education unions as well for the support staff in schools. But Unison, GMB and Unite are the 3 largest recognised unions. Yeah. And I would say it's Unison and GMB probably have the most presence in Somerset Council, and in terms of membership of members of staff that are members of their union. And we're meeting with them on a fortnightly basis at the moment. We've been doing that for the last 18 months and we'll continue to do that. We've met with them already and taken them through the presentation you've had today, because we wanted to make sure that we're doing that early engagement and they come with us on this journey as such, rather than us sort of bring them in at a later date. I think it's really important that we manage expectations and we get feedback from each of the trade unions as we go on what their appetite for change is. They recognise it's something that we need to do, but clearly there might be different levels of expectations in what's affordable for the council. So you're quite right in terms of saying, we can change terms and conditions post a TUPE transfer, but it's not affordable for us as a council to level up to the very best terms of the former district councils, particularly around their redundancy arrangements. It just wouldn't be a sustainable solution. So we have to look at it as a whole. Which is why we don't just want to look at the pay and grading, we want to look at all of the other sort of terms and conditions, and to see if we can come up with a compelling alternative that is affordable for the council, but also will be compelling for members of staff to want to transfer onto those terms and conditions. In some of the other unitaries that have gone through this, you might hear that they're much further ahead with what they might refer to as harmonisation, but that might be the situation where their continuing authority or the former county council had preferential terms to the other councils that were TUPE'd in, and therefore obviously a lot of staff were very happy to, on an individual offer and acceptance basis, move on to different T's and C's much earlier around vesting day. We're not in that situation, unfortunately. So, we may very well find that we have long-term people still remaining on TUPE terms conditions that will lessen over time. as a result of natural turnover. But we'll see what we can achieve with our trade unions, and we very much want to do this in partnership with them.
May I come back, Chair? Sorry, yeah, thank you for, obviously, the reason I asked that number of unions you had, because you want to work towards a collective agreement, as you've said. So that's something that they're going to have to work with you with, and I appreciate obviously that cost is a major factor here. 3 million to do this work, it's quite a lot of money, but it doesn't seem a great deal of money in the scheme of things to get this underway, and this is something I personally would love to see happen here for the council, because I think it would be that much more beneficial to the council. The other thing that I did want to bring in, if you had a collective agreement here with the unions, is the use of contractors and agency workers. Again, that's another issue that has always created disharmony in a lot of organisations that I've worked for, and as a union representative as well, actually. So this is, I'm quite passionate about this and how the workplace works for everybody, and it works well for everybody. But yeah, no, I'm fully in support of working towards this and hopefully get something sorted out properly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Sutton. Councillor Osborne.
Thank you, Chairman. One very minor point on the decision on the decision sign off on the initial report. You omitted the opposition spokesman for transformation resources, etc. So that person has, looking at this, looks as though they haven't been consulted on that. So that's an amendment on the first bit of the report. On the actual paper itself, one of the part of my discussion was planning is when I meet with them from time to time as a opposition portfolio holder, was the whole issue, and I don't know how it came up, but one of the things that was really, really valued within the planning team was the payment of professional fees, and apparently we stopped doing that. For senior staff, they can absorb the cost, but certainly at a junior level, when you're just starting out and you haven't got huge amounts of money to play with, it was a really valuable, shall we call it, a perk. And I really welcome seeing that in your executive summary, that's something to look at again. It would certainly be welcomed in planning. And one of the issues with planning, as you know, we all see it all the time, is that constant turnover of people. And when you get onto your fourth case officer, I think by then everybody is getting thoroughly fed up because it causes problems. If this is something that can make the difference between someone staying and someone leaving, whatever section, I think it's worth doing. If we've got good staff, we should treat them well and we should reward them, because there is a cost to staff turnover.
Thank you, Councillor Osborne. Councillor Filmer.
Yep, thank you. It was just a general point, if I can. I very much welcome the whole way this is heading, with one caveat, and this is the working with the external partner. And I understand £3 million in the great scheme of things isn't a huge amount, but when you're talking to residents, £3 million is quite a lot of money, particularly when we're telling them we're in a financial hole, we're having to watch our spending, and we're then saying we need to bring someone in to do this because we can't do it ourselves. So what I would be asking for is a further explanation of how you're managing the message, both internally and externally, as to why we need this help and what the quantifiable benefits are, the fact that we can do it faster and it'll help us assess the risks. That's sort of out there and a bit intangible. I think for members and for members of the public, we need to understand why this £3 million going outside of the authority can't be dealt with inside, because we do have other partners. We have the LGA, we have the unions, we have other councils, as you say, we can learn from other expertise elsewhere. We just need to be able to explain why we need to bring in and pay for this extra help. And I think I'd just like to hear a little bit more about how we're going to do that.
Dawn, do you want to deal with that?
Thank
It is
you,
a very
Chair.
valid point, and I can see members around the table nodding their heads in agreement.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's probably the biggest question that's going to the executive in May, which is, is there the appetite to do this? And there will be a cost associated with doing it. And there will be a cost later on down the line in terms of implementing a new pay and grading structure. So in terms of why do we need to do this, there's probably lots of reasons, and I think what we'll make sure that we do, as maybe a recommendation from Scrutiny, is we'll strengthen that in the paper to give you a really clear narrative. So, you know, if a member of the public was to ask you, why would you need to do that? Why haven't you got enough officers to do that internally? In the HR and OD new service, we have a very small reward function of 3 members of staff. They're relatively junior members of staff, and they have no experience of delivering a large scale pay and grading review for a unitary authority. So we don't have that expertise in-house. Nicola is with us as an interim transformation lead to support me in the experience that both I and Nicola have got from previous organisations to do this. But we wanted to be really honest and straightforward in that, as much as Nicola and I have got a lot of knowledge and experience, we're not able to put 100% of our time and capacity onto this project to deliver it. And some of the complexities of doing this is around the financial modelling. And as we know, we've also got limitations in capacity as well in our finance team, who've got multiple financial priorities to work on. So when we're looking at modelling the different options, there is a real benefit and strength in having that challenged externally, so we can make sure that we've got a really independent challenge on what we're trying to achieve as an organisation. We should remember that our total gross pay bill for Somerset Council this year is £232 million. So 3 million as a percentage of that 232 million gross pay bill is a small amount of money, but it's really important that we're prepared to invest in our workforce in the right way, because we've probably got a once in generation opportunity of doing this project and doing it well. The last time a project like this of this scale was even attempted was the single status review, really, wasn't it, which was around about 2004 for the previous Somerset County Council. So you can imagine that this is a can that has been kicked down the road for a very long time. The trade unions did agreed to some temporary sort of changes to the pay structure in 2014. They weren't expecting in 2025 that we still have not modernised and transformed our pay and grading. So it's really important that we do this. We were going to have to do it anyway, I think, is the main message that we're trying to say. And we believe 3 million is a prudent figure to ask members for in terms of an investment. We've spoken to other councils that have done this within the last 5 years, and that is the level that they have had to actually spend in bringing in an external partner to help them to do this work. So I think we could have pushed it higher, because some other organisations have spent in excess of 3 million, but we believe that because of where we are and the work that we've done in the last 2 years around the restructure and reorganisation, getting our structures right, getting the foundations right, knowing exactly who we've got employed, having an establishment that we can manage and control, and we know exactly what each post costs us, how it's being funded, where our vacancies are, which we didn't have that data 2 years ago. We feel we're in a much stronger position to work with a partner with better quality data, because quality data in is quality data out. We don't need a partner to tell us what we already know. Nicola and I and my team have got a lot of knowledge, as will finance, and we've got experience of doing a lot of this. What we need is their assurance that we're doing a job evaluation methodology that's absolutely robust and fit for purpose, so we don't keep going back round the loop. And we can also protect the council from future equal pay claims. And I won't quote other organisations that are struggling with this across the whole of the UK at the moment. But as time goes on, as Nicola said, the TUPE protection will wither a little bit, and there'll be more likelihood that we will receive equal pay challenge. And initiating a project like this with some independent challenge will help us mitigate the risks of any equal pay claims that we may receive in the next 2 years. But we'll summarise that more succinctly in the paper. Thank you.
Good, thank you. That's a welcome reassurance. Councillor Osborne again.
Thank you. I could probably justify it in one word. It's called Birmingham, followed by Asda, and I think followed by Next. Equal pay claims, equal value. Those can, well, we know with Birmingham, it's pushed them into a 114. And it's not just the costs of actually the immediate costs, it's the back pay you then have to find as well and how far they get. That's the real killer. And if we were to have one of these claims because we decided to try and do it ourselves, and if we were to have one of these claims, the odds are, and lose, the odds are the millions it would cost us would definitely push us into a 114 beyond a shadow of a doubt.
Thank you, Councillor. Is there any other member who wishes to speak? Right, so if I may then just sum up some of the points that have been made there. Clearly, the clarity of communications concerning the cost of the exercise and why significant sums are being spent on the process externally is a matter of concern to members. And we believe that that therefore needs to be something the executive needs to take into account as well. And perhaps we could link that with reassurance and clarity on the extent of benchmarking with other councils who have already undertaken this sort of process, because I think that is going to be a strong part of the case that will need to be made. The other area I would personally like to see is that the full business case comes back to scrutiny at the appropriate point. We're obviously talking today about the outline business case. I think it would be appropriate for us to see the full business case before it goes live, so to speak. Okay, yep, so absolutely. Thank you. Those are the points that I think I would hope scrutiny would be happy to endorse. Councillor Osborne. I think I noted the officers were sort of nodding when you said that.
It will be in the scope of this review. We recognise it's something that we get asked for a lot. Yeah. We do have some staff that are being paid it because it's contractual for them on their TUPE protected, which again does impact on morale for those who don't. And you know, that's natural, that seems quite unfair. So it's something that we definitely would want to look at. And again, we'll need to look at ways that we can incentivise staff, both current staff and future staff, to want to go on to a Somerset Council contract of employment.
Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, the additional recommendations I would like us to make to the executive are essentially those three: clear comms, reassurance and clarity on benchmarking, and the full business case to come to this committee. If members are happy with that, I'll move that from the chair. Is that seconded, please? May I see all those in favour? That's carried NEMCON again. Thank you very much. So we have dealt with that. Thank you very much indeed, officers, for the clarity of your presentation. That was very welcome, and thank you very much. We look forward to the full business case.
Thank you, Chair.
So we come finally then to agenda item 9, which is the update on the review of the council's scrutiny function and arrangements. And I will invite the two gentlemen on my left, Officers Waldridge and Jackson, to introduce and present the report.
Thank you, Chair. I know we've also got the leader of the council online as well, because I know the leader is also very supportive of the governance review as well. I think for me, again, this just follows on from the report that was brought to your last meeting. Again, this is really just a focus in terms of the actions that have been done since the last meeting, many of which are then set out on paragraph 3.7, certainly for those members. Awareness, the first meeting of the working group has already been held. And again, that's been really useful, particularly in terms of sharpening the scope of the review. And the very next meeting, which is very much going to be a focus in terms of the work that's been done on the members survey, certainly in terms of some initial findings, but also some of the work that's been done in terms of benchmarking and looking at, in particular, what does good scrutiny look like for Somerset Council. So that's where we're at currently. I think the other point for me then is, again, just to highlight, you'll remember when I presented this last time, I did have a sense of that the timetable, and you'll see a revised timetable in Appendix 8. I did say at the time it was an ambitious timetable. Again, just to acknowledge that it certainly was an ambitious timetable. You'll see from Appendix A, again, with the particular steer from the working group, that we are now more focused in terms of finalising the review by July, clearly then to come back to this committee. And then subject to this committee's views, if there are any proposed changes which relate to the constitution, then obviously that would then need to go forward to full council. But I think the key bit is very much about how this committee receives the review and its findings.
Amy, do you want to add anything? No? Members, any comments? Or are you happy with the process today? Councillor Seeb.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm conscious that this is being done on an out of committee basis, or lots of the work is being done on an out of committee basis, ready to come back and report back in. And also that it's a topic of interest to every single member of the authority. So I'm wondering if we have a collection area where the relevant documentation and notes and so on can sit, so that people can keep up to date with the process. And also that would provide for people who substitute in, for example. It's a classic Microsoft Teams channel, to be brutally honest.
Yeah, that sounds very reasonable. Thank you. Yes, well, I'm sure we can do that. Thank you. Any other comments, ladies and gentlemen? Are you happy with the progress to date? So, anybody else in the committee? If not, Councillor Rodriguez. Springing forward to the front.
It's only very quick, out of interest. It's been sent reminders to fill in the members' survey, scrutiny survey. I only wonder if there's an update on how many of the 110 members have taken part in that survey so far.
I think from the last time we checked, which was the middle part of last week, I believe about a third of the membership had certainly been completed. And again, I know there was a further reminder that was issued to all councillors, so certainly hope to increase that level of return.
Thank you, Councillor Rodriguez. And I would say that the working group is very anxious both to see the results of that survey and also the results of the interviews that have been undertaken by the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny, so that can all then be built into the considerations. Councillor Evans, you're here. Is there anything you want to add to that at this stage online?
Thank you very much for bringing me in, Chair. No, I was just listening for the updating and keen to see an outcome on this. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much. Well, that work is ongoing. Hopefully it will be producing some good results reasonably quickly, but as Officer Wooldridge says, I think we have to have a reasonable timeline, and rushing it is not going to be worthwhile. We need an outcome that will be durable. Right, ladies and gentlemen, so the recommendation is that we're asked to consider and comment on the review progress and timeline. I think we've done that. Everyone happy that we have done so? Good, yeah. So, I'm sorry that this meeting has taken so long. You will be pleased to know that we've reached the conclusion of the meeting. Thank you all very much for your attendance and your participation. It has been, as always, a pleasure, and I look forward to seeing you at the next meeting. Thank you all very much.